There are many things said and left unsaid about the Vietnam War, but I think this quote from Richard Nixon is a very powerful one. He said, "No event in American history is more misunderstood than the Vietnam War. It was misreported then, and it is misremembered now. Rarely have so many people been so wrong about so much, and never have the consequences of a misunderstanding been so tragic." Several myths evolved about the Vietnam War, and as I researched my first book and wrote about that, Warriors of 500 Knots and my experiences, I noted these myths and have presented them, and I think it would be appropriate to talk about them today. Myth number one: most American soldiers were addicted to drugs. They were guilt-ridden about their role in the war, and they deliberately used cruel and inhumane tactics. The fact is, 91% of the Vietnam veterans say they are glad they served. 74% said they would serve again, even knowing the outcome. And it's surprising to me, but there is no difference in the drug usage between Vietnam veterans and non-veterans of the same age. Myth number two: Vietnam veterans did not make a successful transition back into American life. The fact is, 88% of Vietnam veterans made a successful transition back into civilian life. 97% were discharged under honorable condition, the same percentage of honorable discharge as 10 years prior to Vietnam. Vietnam veterans' personal income exceeds that of our non-veteran age group by more than 18%. Vietnam veterans had a lower unemployment rate than non-veterans of the same age group. Vietnam veterans are less likely to be in prison. Only 1/2% of Vietnam veterans have been jailed for crimes. Myth number three: most Vietnam veterans were drafted. 65% of the men who served in Vietnam were volunteers. 34% of veterans in World War II were volunteers. And approximately 70% of those killed in Vietnam were volunteers. Myth number four: a disproportionate number of blacks were killed in the Vietnam War. The fact, 86% of the men who died in Vietnam were Caucasian. 12.5% were black, 1.2% were other races, a figure proportional to the number of blacks in the U.S. population at the time. Well, sometimes I've been asked of how about Hispanics? I didn't know the answer originally, but after doing some more research, during the 60s, Hispanics were listed as white. And after doing more research, about 3% of those killed in Vietnam were Hispanic, which was typical of the Hispanic or proportional to the Hispanic population in the 60s. Myth number five: the Vietnam War was fought largely by the poor and uneducated. Fact: Vietnam veterans were the best educated force our nation had ever sent into combat. 79% had a high school education or better. In World War II, only 45% of the troops had a high school diploma. And in Vietnam, 3 times as many college graduates served as in World War II. Myth number 6: the fighting in Vietnam was not as intense as in World War II. The fact: the average infantryman in the South Pacific during World War II saw about 40 days of combat in 4 years. The average infantryman in Vietnam saw about 240 days of combat in 1 year. And one of the reasons for that is the mobility in Vietnam. The helicopter allowed our soldiers to move around from one battlefield to the other, from one outpost to the other, whereas in the South Pacific, for instance, the travel time with ships and boats was much longer. As far as the injuries, 1 out of every 10 Americans who served in Vietnam was a casualty. 58,214 were killed, and 304,000 were wounded out of the 2.5 million who served. Very high number of casualties and deaths. Myth number 7. The United States lost the war in Vietnam. The fact is that the American military was never lost a major battle in Vietnam. They were never defeated. The American military did not lose a single battle of consequence from a military standpoint. From a military standpoint, it was almost an unprecedented performance, and this included the Tet Offensive of 1968 that was so misrepresented in the news, papers, and on TV here, which was a major military defeat for the Viet Cong and the NDA. The Viet Cong were decimated during Tet of 68. They ceased to function as a military force. Myth 8. The average age of infantrymen fighting in Vietnam was 19. The fact is, assuming KIAs accurately represent age groups serving in Vietnam, the average age of infantrymen serving in Vietnam was 22 years of age. We've all seen this picture of the American military on the top of the American embassy, supposedly running for their lives in panic in 1975. Here's the truth. This picture that's represented of the Huey helicopter on the top of the embassy with our military men and women running for their lives. The fact is, it was a civilian Air American Huey, not an American or Marine. It was not the U.S. Embassy, but the Pittman Apartments, which were the living quarters for the CIA, which was 3 blocks south of the embassy. And the evacuees were Vietnamese, not American military. If you remember the Paris Peace Accords that were signed on 27 January 1973, and under the accords, the U.S. military troops had to leave Vietnam within 60 days, which was about 2 years prior to this picture being taken. Myth number 10. The domino theory was proven false. The fact is that the domino theory has been supported as true. Countries of the Associations of Southeast Asian Nations, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, have stayed free as democratic governments because of America's commitment in Vietnam. The Vietnam War was a turning point for communism.
Thank you once again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the Vietnam Wall is here with us until tomorrow afternoon. And then it goes on, I believe it's courtside next week. It's American Veterans Traveling Tribute is the organization that puts it together, and they're a nonprofit such as our museum is as well. And it's a privilege to have them here, and they're really an amazing group. So please, when you're out there, the gentleman's name is John, he's the one that brought it in. They also have donation boxes out there so they can do what it is that they do. But like I said, the wall will be moving on. But the museum has decided that we needed to add something that we could keep with us permanently. So we decided that we were going to have a permanent part of our museum, the Battle Cross. The Battle Cross is something that you'll see on the battlefield or back at the camp. And what it is representing a serviceman or a woman who was lost in battle. It's become customary to arrange the rifle pointing downward with their boots, helmet, and dog tags positioned alongside. The dog tags identify the soldier's name so he or she will never be forgotten. The helmet symbolizes the greatness of their sacrifice. The boots represent the final march the soldier has taken, and the downward-facing rifle signifies a break in the action to pay tribute to a fallen hero. So this will be a permanent part of our museum, and it's dedicated to all those names that are on the wall outside of there. And we will have a plaque that is going to say all those words that I just read. So everybody that comes here, we'll realize exactly how many names are on that wall and how great their sacrifice was. So, thank you all for coming today, and if I could prevail upon you, let's roll open the hangar door here. Let's go outside, take a look at the wall. Maybe some of you know names on that wall. And like I said, in a little while we'll have a bagpiper joining us, and we'll have a moment of silence and amazing grace. So thank you all once again for coming today. Don't forget to visit with Dr. Kirk. He does have his book there. It's an amazing book. But let's go take a look at the wall, folks. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate you being here today despite the weather.